Good morning to everybody. Today I will be talking with Sanchay Roy and Stewart Dunbar, authors of Improving Supply Chains in the Oil and Gas Industry, Volume 16 of the Springer series in Supply Chain Management. In this book, Sanchay and Stewart describe 12 modules to improve chronic challenges for maintenance, repair, and operations. Join me as Sanchay and Stewart share their wealth of experience in both supply chains and oil and gas, and offer practical advice on technical, capability, and change topics. Sanchay, Stewart, welcome to Leaders in CI podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'd really like to start with a short introduction by each of you, and perhaps also you could share with us why you chose to write this book. Sanchay, would you like to start?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for having us on this podcast, Maureen. And Stewart and myself are really pleased to be here and to share some of our experience and our insights as we wrote this book. So I'll start with a little bit of introduction for myself. More than 20 years of experience in supply chain, operational excellence, continuous improvement, and also design thinking. I've worked across many different countries and locations, certainly lived and worked in India, a good part in Europe, and spent a lot of time in China and East Europe as well as setting up new greenfield operations. The industries that I've worked range from consumers, chemical, oil and gas, and our latest experience in oil and gas, where I came across, had the good fortune and opportunity to work together with Stewart, is what led to this book. So maybe I'll hand it over to Stewart. We wrote this book during a COVID period, but I'll let Stewart also share a little bit his thoughts on it. Stewart?
Yeah. Thanks, Sanchay, and thanks, Maureen, for inviting us. So just to give you a little bit of background about me. So I've been in supply chain for just over 30 years now. I've worked in various areas such as retailing or consulting, and now I'm in the oil and gas industry. It's an interesting area to have worked in my career, to effectively, all of my career has been in supply chain. But the good thing about it is we don't know everything about supply chain. We just end up experiencing, and it's day to day, we just find out more and more. And I remember when I first met Sanchay, we were, I think we were possibly in a workshop together, and then probably in a bar afterwards. And we were bemoaning how our history would show us that what we were doing at that moment in time was probably not the best from a supply chain perspective. And as Sanchay said, we wrote the book during lockdown. Lots of people did other very creative things. We decided that the thing we wanted to do was to write a book.
Okay, and yes. I'm glad you did. Thank you. Great.
And indeed, Maureen, I think I must add that this wouldn't have been possible without the support of our family, because we consumed a lot of hours. We had the time available, but we also took it away from our family. So I think both Stewart and myself are quite grateful to let our family go ahead and do this. Yeah. So
yes, I can imagine that. It must be quite daunting. I have written articles myself, which takes quite a lot of time, because you go back again and edit it. So it must have taken you away from your family for some long nights, maybe as well.
Indeed.
What made it all worthwhile, Sanchay? What's unique about this book? Well, what sets it apart from other supply chain books?
Maureen, that's a very good question. It's a perfect start off, because as we were trying to solve some of the chronic problems we encountered in one of the workshops that we had, and we were looking around, and we noticed that there is a real absence of literature specifically dedicated to maintenance, repair, and operations, what we call MRO supply chain, which was rather surprising. Similarly, the resources available in supply chain in oil and gas sector was primarily about the engineering achievements rather than supply chain intricacies. And this gap in literature is significant, considering the concept of supply chain holds a very, very unique importance within oil and gas industry, and it's unique and it distinguishes it from the other sectors. So unlike consumer industries, where repercussions of poor supply chain managements are directly linked to the profitability, the correlation in oil and gas is less apparent. So factors such as procurement spends quite often mask the true cost of poor supply chain, because it only kind of culminates together at the end, where the oil prices in the end are being traded openly in the global market. So you don't really see the true interdependency of supply chain having the impact on end product, if you want to say. And furthermore, the role of MRO supply chain, particularly in upstream and oil and gas sector, cannot be overstated. We see that production output is significantly influenced by market dynamics, geopolitical factors, and like what we see today, rather than traditional competition, like what Stewart and myself, we were discussing, like in consumer industry, if your supply chain does not perform, you immediately lose out to competition. And
Yes.
as one of the notable CEOs said, that it's not our products that compete in consumer industry that compete in the marketplace, but our supply chains that compete in the marketplace. And this part is not very tangible or visible in oil and gas sector. However, having said that, it is very, very critical for its continuity, its availability. And we wrote this book then keeping in mind that how an MRO supply chain is critical to an oil and gas sector. What we certainly believe that it's just as well can apply in the other industries as well, such as construction. So there is a relevance of MRO supply chain that has got what we believe in this book is like it's got a relevance across multiple industries. It could also be in industries, for example, but what we kind of gas sector. Yeah.
Right. So although it could be applied broader across, the focus is on oil and gas, and it has some specific characteristics, this oil and gas industry. Stewart, what would you say those characteristics are? What are the key drivers in oil and gas that sets it apart?
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. And I think I'll just refer back to what Sanchay said. The oil and gas industry, certainly in the upstream area, is very focused on producing what is, relatively speaking, a simple output. It might be complex to get, but it's a simple output, but it's a traded commodity. And so there's no dynamics about if you're not in the market, somebody else will steal your market share. Your market share will go down if you don't produce. However, you will end up being able to sell what you produce. It's not an issue. But you overlay on top of that the sort of geopolitical interest in that sector and by the national economies. And what you have is a very sophisticated set of stakeholders who have an interest and a focus in that sector. And so it might be quite relatively simple what's produced, but the way it's produced and who has to get involved in that production is quite complex. And then if you look at the other side of it, the investment into those assets and the production units is quite immense. You don't get oil and gas cheaply. It typically takes a lot of expenditure into it. But there is the lifespan of these assets is quite long. And so what you end up with is a portfolio that might have very new assets compared to really old assets. And when you look at the older ends, they could be over 20 years old, they require a significant level of maintenance and repair. And it's the newer ones, fine, the older ones, there's a lot of maintenance and repair required. And so despite the fact that the technology in the exploration side and the drilling side has got better and more enhanced, what you find is that the older assets are using archaic technology and old ways of working, and that just drives long lead time and slow processes into their supply chain. So interestingly enough, when COVID came around, as soon as the President of the United States started to discuss supply chains, we realized that supply chain had finally assumed a central role in global affairs, and it had got to the table, to the top table. And I think that's something that has changed across all of industries, but certainly in the oil and gas industry, that part of it has changed.
Yes, you're of course referring to Joe Biden in November of last year.
Okay.
And the creation of the White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience, right?
Correct, yeah.
So that would be a major change in the industry. What are other major changes and how have they affected oil and gas company? What does the future hold in store, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that, Maureen. I think so. From a typically it's the external forces. So you've got the geopolitical forces, obviously, but you've also got those militant environmentalism. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but people are very passionate about the environment, and so the emergence of global climate change accords, that's all shaping and changing the landscape in which the oil and gas industries are operating. Additionally, there's a gap between the affluent and the impoverished, between parts of the world that have got affluence and parts of the world that are really need more development. And if you look at somewhere like Africa, they still are on their transition, and they will need energy to make that transition. So it's quite important to recognise that the things are different depending where you are in the world. And so that sort of two-speed transition, where the developed economies are trying to move towards a cleaner energy, the electric cars, etc., while the developing nations are really just trying to rely on traditional energy means and develop off the back of that. But what all of that does is it presents quite a unique moment, I think, for the oil and gas industry, where the relentless pursuit of production volumes is steadily giving way to the imperative of efficient operations for that equivalent output. And at the heart of that is the supply chain, and it really is the linchpin for end-to-end efficiency.
All right. So when we talk about end-to-end efficiency, as a CI person, we immediately associate that with operational excellence. Sanchay, what would you say is the opportunity for operational excellence and CI in oil and gas companies? And are they actually materializing on these opportunities?
Maureen, so this topic is certainly very, very close to my heart, and I think collectively our heart as well. So this is very important. As Stewart mentioned, that there is a shift towards more efficient operations, highlighting opportunities for operational excellence. That are really quite a lot of that within oil and gas sector. To be very honest, we are leaving so much value on the table, and numerous aspects of both operations and projects. In both cases, we feel that they fail to fully optimize the value delivery. And that can range from simple things like improving hands-on tool time to enhancing the procurement planning or to streamline the maintenance execution. The examples, the moment we start looking into it, these examples, there are quite a lot. And one thing, what we have noticed or what we notice even today is like almost all these opportunities, from the projects to daily operations to maintenance, etc., they can all be connected and underpinned with a culture of continuous improvement and operational excellence. So that's something that we see across the industry, even though I think oil and gas industry, but they themselves might feel that continuous improvement or operational excellence is more related towards widget manufacturing, but what they fail to see is that it's the culture part of it that deeply, deeply applies to them. I think oil and gas companies possess significant potential to adopt and embed this culture in their organizations, and it ranges from both frontline operations all the way to the leadership levels. I think embracing operational excellence in CI will not only enhance efficiency, but also will drive or cultivate a culture of innovation and adaptability that is so necessary in this currently a very, very dynamic and complex geopolitical world that we have.
So there lie also some of the challenges in embracing CI and embracing the culture and basically looking under every stone for savings, would you say?
Yeah, I think they do look, the industry does look, and they have the visibility as well, keeping in mind that this industry attracts some very, very bright talents. So oil and gas, it's very, very bright people in this company. I believe it's what I have observed, rather, let's just put it this way. The challenge lies in its execution. The energy industry is rather volatile, and it's coupled with a very diverse array of stakeholders who have got a very different take on a perspective of their interest. And that can drive a very short-term focused response rather than more long-term actions that will drive savings. And the short-term mindset usually drives behavior such as quick fixes, like headcount reductions, maintenance budget cuts, or inventory write-offs. These things drive more immediate results. And unfortunately, the initiatives that are aimed in driving deep-rooted efficiencies that will kind of last longer and benefit the organizations much larger, and that frequently get passed on to the next successor in line. We've also seen that there's quite a high, quite rapid turnover of people and resources in this organization. So it's always being passed on rather than being embraced at the moment. And that's what kind of holds back the true potential of looking and taking advantage of real opportunities over here.
So I see what you're saying, Sanchay. So it's the short-term focus rather than a long-term focus on sustainability, which in your book, Stewart, you identified as chronic challenges. Where would you say oil and gas companies are now in respect to these chronic challenges?
Yes, that's a good question. Thanks, Maureen. I think first of all, it's worth just delving a little bit into, the background of where we are in the oil and gas industry. And as Sanchay said, there are very, very bright people in the oil and gas industry, and they've developed and designed ways of extracting oil and gas from really, really hostile environments. And whether that's underwater, on land, in swamps, ice, whatever, super, super intelligent people. And on top of that, there is a massive focus on safety. And safety is really important in the industry. It's absolutely, we as an industry want to make sure that the people who work here are safe and go home at the end of every day. And that's absolutely paramount. But there's another side to all of that. So that might be the main focus. But the other side is that there are support functions. And those support functions are often just seen just as that, support. They're not considered to be primary. But if you look at something like supply chain, it is in itself a critical support function. It's not the primary objective, but it's critical in order that the primary function can deliver what it needs to deliver. But what ends up happening is, because it's seen as a secondary function, either the people who are put into the roles to run it don't have that skill base, because it's seen as a very technical sort of organization where technical people can do any job, and that's not always the case. And sometimes it's just the lack of attention that's given to it. It has to deliver. It doesn't matter how it delivers. And so it's almost ends up with the results where the mindset for supply chain is that it meets the minimum performance standard is the primary objective. We're not bothered about it meeting a world-class performance. It just has to deliver what it has to deliver. But Sanchay and I, and many times, and as I said before, over a few beers, many times we had the conversation that really we should be focusing the objective towards driving world-class performance, irrespective of whether it's a primary function or whether it's a secondary function in the industry. And by doing this, we could genuinely shift that needle for the industry, really move it well. And then finally, so the onset of COVID-19 and the shipping disruptions and the Suez Canal blockage, etc., have brought all of those secondary functions into sharp focus for stakeholders. But there remains a risk that it was in focus, and if it's no longer in focus, then the organizations will just move back and the industry will just move back to the way it's always done things, rather than seizing the opportunity. And that's really what the book's about. It's about saying, let's seize the opportunity that's provided and let's shift it and make a step change.
Make a step change. Now, there are many support functions, and your book really focuses on the supply chain. You have talked about that a bit, but specifically, why the supply chain? How will it help these challenges?
Yeah, so yeah, I guess as we said earlier, Sanchay and I only really know supply chain, so that's why we focused on that. If we'd have been HR professionals, maybe we'd have focused on HR. I don't know, but with over 50 years of experience working in those, that's what we know, and that's what we focused on. We don't profess to know every aspect, and as you know, Maureen, supply chains are all encompassing from one end to another. It's not just movement of materials, it's not just planning, it's everything joined together from one end to another. We've seen a lot in supply chain, we've experienced a lot, we've made mistakes, we've probably made more than we should have done, but we learn from them. That's how you move on in this world. So whilst we were working in the oil and gas sector, it was natural for us to talk about our experiences elsewhere and then compare them against that sector and say, how does this industry differ and why does it differ? If you look at something like retailing, for instance, the margins are very tight.
Yes.
And so supply chain is such a big proportion and has such an impact on the bottom line that there's a great deal of focus on it. If you look at something like automotive is very complex. You've got very many variants of the same thing, different colors, different sizes, different materials, etc. And so they rely on the supply chain to deliver what they need and when they need it without having oodles of inventory and so on. And so what they look at is not just an efficient supply chain, but to drive excellence in execution and have the supply chain deliver a contribution, not just be a support function. And we know that in the oil and gas, or what we've seen in the oil and gas industry, is that it is seen just as a support function.
Yes.
And it should be that perception should be changed, we believe, to be the lifeblood of the operations, because without it, they won't survive.
Right. Okay, thank you. So Sanchay, Stewart just said, it's not just planning. However, in the book, you do identify the planning process of the supply chain as the giant hairball of a problem. So could you expand on that a little bit, please, for our audience?
Yes, Maureen, that was, I distinctly remember that this particular topic, we spent quite a lot of time talking about it, and our emotions ranged from frustration to various range. So first of all, I'd like to say that planning does exist. in oil and gas sector. It's not that this function is absent. It's there. The challenge lies, and this is what we were learning after a lot of frustration, of conversation with the stakeholders. The challenge lies in its fragmented nature, you know,
Okay.
and all these plans are developed within functional silos, and they rarely, if ever, converge at the enterprise level. And that was our big aha moment. And we realized that because that convergence is not happening really, there is a lot of duplication in efforts and there is a lot of overlapping demands. And all of this places really unnecessary additional strain on the suppliers of service and equipment, because that is a finite resource and many different functions are kind of a leaning on that. This has quite some consequences. A true example of that we highlighted in our book regarding series of bankruptcy faced by the helicopter service providers.
Yes.
And that was quite telling, because these operators expanded their fleet capacities at a considerable expense, driven by inflated demands stemming from inefficient practices and poorly defined KPIs. So, as you can imagine, maintaining a fleet of helicopters with its maintenance, airworthiness, pilots, capable pilots, etc., all of that drives quite some cost. Now, when the industry shifted its attention towards cost improvement, the real usage level dropped down to a more uh, realistic amounts, right?
Like a
And that
stone.
left helicopters with excessive capacity at unsustainable prices. And that and series of them, multiple of those, they just filed for bankruptcy. And that is really sad, because what happened was the supply base shrank in the marketplace. So you had fewer operators on whom you could lean upon, who were trying to serve a wider demand base in this case. So this scenario kind of underscores the importance of integrated planning across functions at the enterprise level. And by breaking down the silos and promoting alignment, organizations can mitigate these inefficiencies. They can optimize resource utilization and ensure more effective and efficient operations by level loading the demand across the board and having that collaboration between the functions.
I see. So I see. Always an end-to-end approach at an enterprise level will uncover a lot of waste and many opportunities that we can materialize.
Indeed.
When we talk about planning in CI, Sanchay, we immediately associate this also with do, check, and adjust, PDCA. What are the insights of PDCA cycle, and for that matter, causal analysis on this topic?
Yeah. It's a good question, Maureen. And what we have observed is that PDCA, causal analysis, CI tools, they are often used in the industry. However, I firmly believe that their usage should be and can be broadened.
Mhm.
And for example, the industry uses causal analysis quite effectively. And that expertise lies within the industry with some very, very capable talents driving that. However, what we notice is that causal analysis is quite often will be used to define the root causes of very high risk HSCC related failures, right?
Yes.
Or near misses. So they put a lot of energy in going behind why such a failure took place. And we keep on thinking like, but how about using the same skills to analyze why your warehouses are bloated, why your operations shut down, or why were there missing spares or missing chemicals? I mean, the same kind of a thought process can be applied to the other functions if you put your mind attention to it, so that I think the true potential lies in embracing operational excellence as a common or a shared language across the functions and business. And by fostering a culture of collaboration, continuous improvement, organizations can really unlock new opportunities for sustainable growth and success. And then it won't be a spot event, but it's something that becomes the way an organization strive or operate themselves.
Yes, not only on the technical content, but on your processes as well, and how you
Indeed.
collaborate together. Okay, thank you. And then, Stuart, it seems from the supply chain, you then moved into production and operations planning as the key concept for oil and gas supplies. How did you arrive at pinpointing the production and operations planning?
Yeah, this was another one of those experiences that Sanchay and I had, and we were privileged to look at a few plans within the organisations we were working around and with, and it became apparent that the plan was put together with, I guess, an element of distrust. And that distrust in the supply chain meant there was contingencies built into the plan. And it wasn't contingencies that extended the plan, it was contingencies that pressurized the plan. And so activity was brought to the beginning of the plan, knowing that it couldn't be done, and that hopefully by the end of the plan, what couldn't be done at the beginning would be done by the end. And so what it actually did is it actually demonstrated that the planning process was planning to fail and failed because it was planning to fail. And so it wasn't like failing to plan, plan to fail. It was actually the plan itself caused itself to fail. And so one of the things that we were looking at, Sanchay and I, was that, the interaction between the parties in the plan needs to be a much more level playing field. And as I said earlier, that once you get to the table as an equal partner rather than as a support function, that makes things much easier to do. And what you want is a plan that everybody signs up to. You want a plan where all expectations are managed, and then any exceptions to that plan are collaboratively resolved as they happen. And we didn't have to look too far away to see the sales and operations planning, the S&OP process, to see what a good process could look like. And then we said, well, how can we adapt that and use it within the production and operations planning area?
Right, right. And then you elaborated that, or you worked that, Sanchay, into the 12 modules that you identify in your book for a supply chain transformation that will help you deliver a remarkable improvement. Could you describe the core concept and the fundamental principles of production operations planning, please?
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. As I previously mentioned, operational excellence and continuous improvement are pivotal in addressing these concepts. And enhancing the collaboration in planning, for instance, can mitigate duplication and the inflation of the demand plan, which kind of led to some of the disaster in supply bases, the helicopter example that we mentioned earlier, right? As Stewart mentioned, like in consumer industry, they have successfully navigated these issues by embracing a very mature sales and operation planning. It's called S&OP process, which today, if I believe, it like serves almost like a background of the supply chain operations. And it is a highly collaborative exercise. In some industry, these plans are updated in real time. In others, they are more predictive or forecasted in nature, but it is the backbone of this industry. In maintenance, repair, and operations, the MRO supply chain, the dynamics differ, and it differs in the sense like the demand is defined by operational requirements. It's not a end customer which is defining it, but it's operations that is defining it, And for example, the breakdowns or plant maintenance or amount of consumables, etc., that you require. So unlike traditional supply chain where a customer demand is dictating the operations, in MRO, the operations is defining the supply chain or the demand aspect of the supply chain. So we can therefore, our discussion, and Stewart and Wiesel, this was one of our, I think probably it came over a beer or over a drink or something like that. We were thinking like, the S&OP process, where the sales part, if we now take the sales part and replace it with production, we create a production and operations plan process. So a P&OP instead of S&OP, it's P&OP. The encouraging aspect of this thing is that S&OP is a very, very mature process with a lot of knowledge already existing in the industry and expertise existing in the industry. But by shifting the focus from sales to production, we can easily embrace all the knowledge over here that is available and drive necessary improvements in even at the enterprise level by driving this P&OP level. But it is easier said than done, despite having all this opportunity, because the real challenge will still lie in cultivating the culture and also attracting the right skills to fully leverage and sustain this approach. So, it's very easy to understand once you get your mind around it. But I believe if you don't have the culture of that collaboration, operational excellence, CI across the silos, functional silos, then I don't think even the best laid out plans will even work. So, yeah.
Yes, and I agree. It is really difficult. And of course, in other industries, sales and operations planning has been around a much longer time, has taken time to mature. But ultimately, we're not driving a culture for the sake of culture, but we're really driving a culture for the benefits that we can see year on year sustainable. So it's really, in terms of measurable improvements and measurable gains. And what would be the measurable improvement if you were to transform to a production and operations planning in oil and gas?
Yeah. No, it's a spot on question. Quite simply, the measurement will be ultimately production availability. And that's what it is. So I think all the assets will look at it primarily. What is the availability of my asset and how much am I producing every day? However, there are some leading indicators, that will help the plan adherence and completion, because production availability, as you can understand, is a lagging KPI, but the leading indicator would be a plan adherence and completion of the plan, the contract availability, seamless execution. So there'll be a series of these leading indicators that kind of support that availability as an ultimate target.
Okay. And of course, zero deferment is one of the major words in the oil and gas industry. So that would really be a trigger to transform to that cultural change. That, as you pointed out, is really the challenge. What new capabilities are required to drive that transformation?
I think the good news is that these skill sets and capabilities of, let's say, either S&OP or operational excellence and CI, etc., they are not scarce. They are readily available. The key lies in their adoption and practice from the frontline level all the way to the senior leadership. And quite often we found at frontline level, there was a lot of traction, but senior leadership level, they couldn't always get their arms around it. And we found that a masterclass for the leadership usually helped a lot, because that kind of made them aware of the key concepts. It made them aware of their potential impact on the operations. And it went a long way to encourage them to ask the right questions to the team so that they can support them, And I think these masterclass that we prepared, leadership usually have got a very, very packed agenda. But if you design a targeted session for about a day or day and a half, or 2 days max, kind of thing, those sessions done in the assets where we did it, we saw a remarkable change in how the leadership started engaging with the team. So I think that kind of fosters a culture of continuous improvement, learning and development, and it also nurtures a more empowered frontline and effective leadership across the board. So I think I would strongly recommend organizations who are going on the journey or something, or trying to improve, that they should consider this, not only the frontline, but how the leadership also goes through some sort of a masterclass sessions to learn about these core concepts. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So, a lot about leadership. As stewards, we know that the role of leadership is really important in transformation. Culture is the determining factor. In the words of Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And as culture gets handed down vertically, we do look at senior leadership as the major catalyst for culture. What will you add to Sanchay's words on the true task of leadership when culture meets transformation?
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. That's a really good question. I mean, I think it's important first of all to just consider transformation in itself and say, actually, how do organizations deliver transformation? Is it as a project or is it
Yeah.
as a culture within the culture? And I think that if it's delivered as a project, then that's a big problem. And if you look at leaders, great leaders possess that deep understanding of how the organization responds and reacts. And then they understand that sustainable transformation requires more than just achieving the objects of that transformation. So if we're doing cost reduction or we're doing structural changes or the focus is something else, they may well be met because of the focus that is given to that particular element at that particular time. But once that focus disappears, inevitably things will go back to the way that they've always been. So, that underscores the need for the transformation to become an integral part of the organizational toolkit and embed it into daily operations rather than to be treated as a discrete event or project. And I think the other thing that's worth saying is, it's important that leaders steer away from constant upheavals, transient projects or fads, and they should focus on cultivating that sort of environment where change is embraced, people are involved in it regardless of where you are in the organization, and are part of the implementation, because ultimately people then welcome the opportunity that brings. It's not imposed, it's something that's accepted and they are part of it. So if the cultural aspect of the business hasn't been put in a good place, then the changes that are implemented will be treated primarily with skepticism. And then ultimately, people will either revert back to what they did before or will go into survival mode. Neither of those two things is good for the business.
No, neither of those is good for the business. Neither of those would be good for the supply chain either, right?
Indeed, yeah. And I think supply chain is no different to any other parts. And I talked about it earlier. If we'd have been HR, maybe the book would have been in an HR turn of phrase. But it's on supply chain, and the qualities of leadership required are exactly the same wherever you are. Effective leaders must demonstrate that genuine interest in people, not only in the job that they do, but also in who they are as individuals. So it's really important to look at the whole and to look at the people that are in the organization. And, the funny thing is, we've all worked for remarkable leaders, and they actually typically transcend their organizational titles or position. And they could be leading the front line on the shop floor, or they could be in the boardroom. Their ability to drive that change remains consistent, and a leader's influence can just extend beyond what the authority the organization has given them, and they can influence upwards, downwards, purely by having that open and honest communication with those in the organization. They typically excel at articulating their perspectives and advocating for change through the power of influence rather than through their authority and what's being given to them. So, ultimately what distinguishes great leaders is their ability to inspire trust, regardless of their level within the organization.
Yes, thank you so much. We're coming to the close of our topic. Sanchay, what is the benefit that continuous improvement can bring to the leaders in oil and gas supply chains?
Yes, Maureen. I think if we look at our today's world, where we inhabit, it's what we call the VUCA world is the coin town, but it's the current reality. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's highly complex and ambiguous, and in this landscape, the teams have to continuously evolve, innovate, and seek out better ways of working. And I think if you look at the continuous improvement mindset or culture, that is a cornerstone for all these challenges that the teams face today. The CI mindset provides a foundational culture that really creates that agility and resilience in the team required to respond to uncertainties. The whole CI culture is all about that, and by fostering that culture of continuous improvement, you drive a mindset that is fundamental to succeed in today's day and time, and that mindset that embraces change, a mindset that encourages experimentation, a mindset that drives a relentless pursuit of excellence given whatever challenges that are presented to them. And I think CI is a cornerstone for that. It's a foundation bed, and all leaders must consider getting good at it themselves, or how to introduce this in their organization. Yeah.
But that isn't very easy to do.
Indeed, it's not. That's where I believe a KI team can offer great support to the various organizations, right? So,
thank you. Well, thank you both immensely for sharing your insights with us. My final question on the topic for now that we've come full circle is if could you offer one piece of advice to those in our audience that are in oil and gas and are struggling to get issues in the supply chain recognized and addressed? What you say to them?
I'll start with that. So my simple suggestion would be adopt operational excellence as a common language for the organization and do it for the long haul. Invest in training and culture, and always walk the talk.
Always walk the talk. Thank you. Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, and I emphasized it earlier, it's about lead others the way you want to be led. And on the side of that, just make sure you put supply chain in the positive aspect that it really is to the organization, the benefits it can really bring to an organization.
Okay. Thank you very much. To close our podcast, I'd like to ask you some more personal questions. Just quickly, for instance, what do you do to keep your body and mind fit and sharp? What do you do, Sanchay?
Well, we write books and we ride motorcycles.
Multiple books? You haven't
Not yet. Not yet.
The first one. Okay. You ride a bicycle too, Stewart?
Yeah, indeed. So we're not riding motorcycles or writing books or indeed drinking, because I seem to have talked about drinking throughout this podcast. But we have two terriers, and they really do love walking on the beach, and we don't get there often enough, but we do take them. And unfortunately, they do actually need somebody to chaperone them, so I have to walk with them. They can't do it for themselves.
That's a good way to keep healthy. How about favorite business books? What would be your favorite business book, Sanchay?
I think there are so many, but I think if you need to pick a few from the top of my mind, one is The 4 Disciplines of Execution is a good handbook for leaders in the front line. It's a very tactical in nature. It helps the team to get things done. I think the book by Thomas Mann on creating a lean culture talks about how on the long term you might invest in driving a lean culture. And finally, I think the Strategic Kaizen by Masaki Imai is also a great addition, to look at long term and how to think more strategically about long term and then embed it in the organization. So from tactical to culture to long term, I think these are the few that come immediately to my mind, Maureen.
Excellent choices. Thank you. What about you, Stuart?
Yeah, mine. Really, the first business book I read, which will be my favorite, which is Lean Thinking by Womack and Jones, and it just introduces you into the whole process of lean.
Yes, absolutely. A great book. And how about podcasts? Do you have podcasts, favorite podcasts that you listen to?
Well, this has just started, so my first very you certainly put me on the habit, and this is already. I've just added this to my list, and I'm sure it will grow more from here onwards. Yeah.
Right. How about you, Stuart? Your first
Yeah,
time too?
yeah. So I'm not a great podcast listener, to be honest, but I've just got into the Diary of a CEO with Steve Bartlett. And it's one of those things that he sounds like a great leader, to be honest, and I'd love to meet him just to see, whether what you hear and what you see is what it is like in real life. So
That's actually real. Yes. Actually, that podcast is one of Caroline Lum's favorites as well. She was our guest on our first podcast and mentioned this one too.
fantastic.
Who should be our next podcast guests then, and why? Who would you like to hear from, Sanchay?
It'll be great to hear from the experiences from other oil and gas industries,
Okay.
and it's an industry that is in transition, and but still has got a fundamental role to play in that transition. I think collectively we would all benefit from learning about their journey also as well. So if you can invite some of them more in, then that'll be fantastic.
All right. I'll
Yeah.
certainly put them on my list. Thank you, Sanchay.
Yeah.
Stuart, who would you like to hear from?
Yeah, so for me, I'd like to hear from people who are looking out to the future of the supply chain, and whether they're consultants or whoever. But what will the future bring? Where will automation and AI really take us to in the future? What we're likely to see in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years from now?
Okay, thank you. Most actual and current topic indeed. What can AI bring to any function in the company? But supply chain is very much looking at that at the point in time.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally, I'll turn the last words over to you as you can address our audience directly. Is there anything we can help you with?
Well, for the audience, for the people who have read our book, if you have not, please do so. If you have already, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from your experiences. Tell us what you thought about it. It just helps us get better in the spirit of continuous improvement on our own journey. Yeah, please do reach
For
out and
your
let us.
next book.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Sanchay. Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Sanchay said there, I mean, we've written the book as if because it's our perspective of things. It's not necessarily the truth. It's what we see. And it might not be the same as what other people see. So it would be great to see different perspectives and improvements in terms of how we can make the MRO supply chain better and change it for the better going forward. So that would be really good.
All right. So for my part, I thought the book was very easy to read, very well written, very clear with good examples. And of course, contains a lot more detail than we had time for today because you explain all of the 12 modules very well and has good, strong visuals. So I would certainly recommend our audience to read the book and to take Sanchay and Stewart up on their invitation to share your suggestions for improvements or your feedback with them. For today, that's all we have time for. Once again, Stewart, Sanchay, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing all of your insights and your experience and also some of your personal details on beer with us. And we hope to see you again soon in the future. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.